Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Joel Cadesky, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Show. I cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to do this. From the bottom of my heart, I'm super excited to get your life story on tape. Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. Because here's what we know. People who listen to our podcast are looking to connect with you. And there's something about your life story they're going to connect with, some sort of commonality, right? Could be anything. And what we know is it's going to inspire and motivate them to do something that they have been putting off, like maybe writing a book about retirement, right? Or maybe, you with me? So that's what we're all about. We're all about inspiring and motivating. And I cannot thank you enough for being here.
It's my pleasure, and I'm very excited to tell my story. I love telling my story.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start with where you were born and go all the way up to today, okay? And then we need to talk about the book, and then we also need to talk about anything else that you're working on for the future, okay?
Sure.
Perfect. So where were you born?
Owen Sound, Ontario, Canada, November 11th, 1945.
There you go. There you go. Did you grow up there?
Yes, I did. I grew up. I went to public school, high school, graduated, and then I went to university. After that, out of town, 1 year in the University of Toronto, where I did abysmally and I failed. Then I ended up at the University of Guelph in Guelph, Ontario. And fortunately, I realized I have to study and not party. And I did both, but I did more studying than partying. And I got my undergrad degree, so I do have a BA. So yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing how many people we have on here that they go to college and they really major in partying in the very beginning, and then they figure out, oh, I'm actually here to study. I gotta buckle down a little bit.
It took 1 year. The problem with the University of Toronto, Mike, was that I came from a small town of 17,500, and I went to the Toronto, which at that time had about maybe 1.5 million, 2 million people, and I couldn't adapt to the big city, and I just could not, and I got homesick, and I was 18, and that was just a horrendous year for me. I didn't live on campus, which was also difficult. Yeah. So I was living with an older couple, about 70 years of age, which in retrospect was young, but now, back then was old. They couldn't identify with me. And I ended up, just having a lousy year. And then I went to the University of Guelph, and I just found my homecoming, because everybody there in my first year in the arts, we all had jackets from every university possible, because we're all flunkies. They took the flunkies out, and you know what? I learned, and we did well. But yeah, growing up in Owen Sound, small town's got its advantages. Unfortunately, the big disadvantage was it was too small for me.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. What was your favorite thing about growing up in Owen Sound?
I think the greatest thing was I just had a great set of parents that gave me a good life, and I just had a great childhood. I don't think it was because of the small town. I think I'm Jewish, and I think the Jewish community was very, very tight. When I grew up, every Saturday night, Mike, this is hard to believe, every Saturday night in the bottom of the Owen Sound synagogue, all of the adults, my parents included, would meet every Saturday night. And the women would be on one side, the men would be the other. They would talk, they would do this, whatever. 52 weeks a year. If you didn't make it, you didn't make it. But they never had a weekend out of a year that they said, well, nobody's coming. And I think that camaraderie with that. And then, of course, I got with the young kids that I grew up with that went to Jewish school. I don't know. I look back on my childhood and I say, you know what? Except for the anti-Semitism, there isn't anything in my childhood that I wouldn't change, except for that.
So here's a question for you. Who was the most influential person to you growing up?
My parents, both of them. Yeah, my dad, and I write in the book. I wrote in my book about my dad. And that's the reason I wrote my book. I wanted my grandkids and my children to understand what I did and how I lived and how I grew up, because I never heard very many stories from my father and mother. And what I did, I put in the book, but it was very small. My parents, like, I am the person I am today because of them, no question about it. And people that knew me, I mean, most of them are, pretty well all dead now, but the people that knew my parents years ago, they all said I was a clone of them. The humanitarian in me, the work ethic that I saw with my dad, a single proprietor that never once got a paycheck in his life. The first time I got a summer job and got a paycheck, he wanted to see what it was like. He said, "What are these deduction stuff?" He had no idea what a deduction was, and the income tax taken off. He had no clue, because he never worked for anybody in his life except himself.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So in high school, in Old Sound, right? What was your favorite subject?
Math.
Yeah.
Yeah, love math. And I think partly because I had a couple of decent teachers, and I think it was just, I even to this day, I'm very good at math. I don't use a calculator that often. I can do things in my head very quickly, and I'm very organized. And when I do presentations, it's mathematically set up. But I never went and pursued it. Like in university, I didn't go into a math course. I went into an art course. In high school, I took some algebra, some geometry, but I just love numbers, and I still do to this day. I'm very good at numbers.
So here's a question I'm not sure anybody has asked you, but it's important, I think, to ask.
Sure.
That 1 year that you were at university in Toronto, what did you learn? In other words, what was the most important thing you took away from that experience?
Oh, that's a great question. Nobody really has asked that question, but I can tell you, I can answer that very quickly. I realized I was an immature child, and I had to grow up, or I was going to be like, my future was going to be down.
Yeah.
So I came away, and that's why I excelled in the University of Guelph. I did really, really well, because I learned, like, I was such an immature, just horrible. Like I mean, I'm not ashamed to tell people there were nights at the University of Toronto when I was at home in this room, and I would cry.
Mhm.
An 18-year-old kid crying his eyes out because I was homesick,
Yeah.
and I didn't know where to go, and I floundered. So I realized when I failed, and I got that nice letter. By there was no emails then. It was all sent in registered letter, and
Yeah.
it said, "You failed." And I just realized, and my dad came to me and said, "Not a big deal. We'll figure it out, but you better start thinking what you're going to do to change." And I think that was failing. Actually, they always say if you fail, it succeeds.
Yeah.
And that's the answer to that question. By the way, you're right. Nobody's ever asked me that.
Yeah,
And
you're only ever gonna succeed or learn. That's basically what it boils down to, right? And that's why I thought it was important, because when you went to Wealth University, you really were kind of hyper motivated. And part of it was you kind of had, you kind of got spanked a little bit in your first year at Toronto, right? And so you were looking to prove yourself.
I didn't get spanked a little bit. I got spanked a lot.
Right.
I really did. But you're right. I had to prove to me more than anybody else. And I wanted to prove to my parents, who never once ever made me feel small when I failed. Never. But I know in their heart, they were so disappointed. And I didn't want to disappoint them, and I didn't want to disappoint me.
Yeah.
But I really, really, you're right. I was motivated, and I just went gangbusters, and I did really well. Because I took courses that I liked, and I majored in sociology.
Yeah.
And I'm a people person, as you can tell, and obviously I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I wasn't. And I just excelled. I loved the class. And I also liked the small town. Guelph at that time, I think, was 40,000 people.
Yeah.
So it's still a small town. I was adapting to it. I stayed with a couple of guys in a house, and we could walk to school. We didn't need a car, and we just had a good time. We did party. I'm not going to say we didn't, but we studied more, much more, and we did well. We did really well. The guys that I was with, one of them actually became a very high-profile lawyer out west.
So here's a question for you. Growing up the way you grew up, learning from your parents, it sounds like, and tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you learned how to pivot, and you learned how to dig down deep and make this right. So after the Toronto setback, right? It sounds like you you leaned on what you learned growing up that your parents taught you about how to turn this into a win.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, I go back to, you asked that question, what's the thing about Owen Sound? And I say I liked everything except anti-Semitism. My dad had to succeed in Owen Sound. And remember, he was starting back in the 50s and 60s, where anti-Semitism, small town, was high. And he was able to succeed. He never got wealthy. I always tell people he wasn't wealthy, but he was successful in my mind. And I learned from him that you've got to dig deep. Like, there's nobody else to rely upon you. And he just dug in there quiet. Like my dad, if he was here today, wouldn't say 10 words. He's very, very quiet, but he got the job done. And as a parent, he taught me, and I always tell everybody, I said, I learned so much from my dad through osmosis. He never sat down and, like some parents, well, today I'm going to tell you how to do this. But you saw him, and he was such a role model, but he was quiet. And you just don't realize, and I always tell my kids, you more likely won't realize what I've done for you until I'm long gone, and you're at that stage 50, 60 years down, and you'll realize what I did, because that was what my dad, I didn't you know what, I never said this to anybody, but I don't think I ever appreciated my dad until I wrote this book. Because I started thinking about what did he teach me, and I go, holy smokes, he did so much. But when I grew up, I never even thought of it.
You know, leadership is about what you do more than about what you say.
Yes.
Okay. And parenting isn't any more than leadership, sacred leadership, right? And so watching your dad and watching how he dealt with things and watching how he fixed things and he made things work and his determination, that was a great way for you to grow up and learn.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there. And I never really realized it until I went away and came back. And then later on in life, when I started on my own career and started realizing, because when, I mentioned it in the book, because, I did go from birth right through to 75. And, what I encountered as a teacher in a small town, again, notice I went to a small town, Elmer, Ontario, 5,000 people.
Yeah.
But I was able to survive there as well.
Yeah.
And I talk stories about anti-Semitism where, I won't give it away, but it was there. And I had to dig deep. I mean, when I'm introduced to the first set of teachers in my first year of teaching, this is Joel Cadesky. He's got a BA and he's Jewish. Hello, that's a good start to with your camaraderie with your colleagues.
Yeah, thanks a lot, right?
Yeah, thanks for running me under the bus. Oh,
No
you're
kidding.
driving it too, right?
No kidding. Yeah, I love the way you grew up, and it sounds like your parents were just absolutely awesome. And the childhood you had taught you a ton.
Yeah, and I've talked a lot about my father. I just want to quickly give my mother kudos too, because she said something to me that I've said 100 times, that I tell people. Even when I was older, she would always be there for me when I needed something. I always went to her when I needed something. I never went to my dad, which was very interesting when I look back on it. And she said, you won't realize this until I'm gone, but as long as you're alive, you're still my little boy.
Yeah.
And you know what? My kids now, I think of that all the time. I do things with them and help them and be with them and give advice. And you're right. As long as I'm alive, I'm still their father and they're still my kids.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot from them too.
It never goes away.
It doesn't. It does not. And you don't realize, and this is the other unfortunate thing, Mike, and that's another reason I wrote the book. When your parents pass away, it's too late.
Yeah.
Then you start realizing and you start thinking about it and you go, geez, I wish I had more time to talk to them. I wish I had more time to do it. I never realized some of the stuff that they were talking about. Yeah. I'm just, and that's another reason I wrote the book. I didn't want my kids, when I'm dead, to realize. I want them while they're alive to read the book and ask me questions.
Yeah. So when I was 18 years old, I was in my dad's garage and we were having a beer and we were talking. And yes, I was having a beer at 18. But I was in his garage talking with him, and he looked at me and he said, right now, you're looking at me like I'm an idiot. One of these days, I'm going to be a genius in your eyes. And about 15 years later, I called him and said, well, you made genius level.
Yeah.
Right. And he got so tickled at the fact that I recognized that he knew what he was talking about. Right. And I told my kids growing up, I said, listen, there's a reason why God put us here first. We've lived, we've experienced, we've failed, right? We've created wisdom here that came from some of it bad judgment, right? And we're here to teach you. We're here to share with you what we've experienced, good, bad, or indifferent. And whether you take the advice or you don't, I'm going to share it with you, right?
Yep.
No parenting. Okay, so graduate from college. Then where do you go?
So I was like most of the guys there. We flunked out of university. We went there. We just wanted to get a degree. And now I'm in my last semester at the university. And I'm sitting there saying, I haven't got a clue what I want to do, like
Right.
most guys. I don't want to be an engineer. I didn't take an engineering course. I didn't take a physics course to be in science. So the last semester, I took a sociology course with a professor called Professor Hadwin. And he influenced me enough. The way he did his class was first class. Okay, anybody here who wants to get a passing grade, you got it. Now, if you want to learn, stay. If you just want a passing grade, I'll give you your 60%, which was passing at that time. And you'll get it. So I stayed. And he taught me, all we did was sat around a circle every class and just talked about anything. And then at the end, we wrote an essay about what we learned. And that's what my mark was. And I got an A. Yeah. But so what I did was I decided, you know what? This is to really turn me on. I want to be a teacher because I want to be him.
Yeah.
So I ended up going to the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. And they had a program, brand new, talk about timing. Everything in life is timing for the better. Only 12 or 13 of us for BAs. They wanted to see if a BA teacher was a better teacher than the teacher that came out of grade 12. So I was in a special BA class. It was called Althouse College. And it was University of Western Ontario. And for the year, they put us through the rigors of a teacher, but much more stringent to see if we could handle it. And then I ended up going to Elmer and becoming a teacher for 9 years. And I put it in the book and how I got the job and then why I left. But yeah, that's really, but it was just, if it wasn't for Hadwin, I don't know what I would have done. I really don't. I more likely would have come back to Owen Sound and my dad would have got me a job with the bank or something like that, some bank manager, help my son out and work there the rest of my life.
Yeah. What was your favorite thing about teaching?
Oh, molding the kids. Oh, I love that. I love the bad kids. I was known as the disciplinarian at the school, as well as the contrarian and all the other stuff that went with it. And I love taking the worst kids. So our school that I ended up, the first 2 years was just a regular. And then I ended up getting this situation where I went to a senior school where we had grade 7, grade 8, and they had 4 feeder schools. And I always found out from the other teachers which one of these kids coming in were the rottenest, worst, toughest kids. And I worked with these kids and molded these kids and worked with them and made them feel good. And at the end of the year, the parents would come to me and send me letters and say, my kid, I can't believe he's going to grade 9 and you made him or whatever. And to this day, I still ever so often do get phone calls from people saying, are you Mr. Cadesky that taught at Elmer years ago? Yes. Well, I was one of your students. I just happened to be in Toronto and thought I'd phone you. Wow. So that was the first thing I loved about teaching. The second thing I loved about teaching was I used to do phys ed and math, grade 7, grade 8. And I did the math in the morning, but the afternoon I did the phys ed. And I used to be the coach. I used to play on the offense or defense or where they're doing basketball, and I used to be the referee. And I loved the physicality because that's when I could assert my influence on the kids that I'm still the disciplinarian teacher, even though we're having fun and you're learning. So yeah, I love teaching for those reasons. Beautiful.
So here's a question. Why? In other words, why did you take such great pride in molding these children, and why the ones that were the roughest and the toughest? Why?
Challenge.
Yeah.
I couldn't just take a student that was going to get an A every time. I mean, what can I teach him? The kid's going to get it regardless. If I don't teach him, he's going to figure it out.
Right.
I wanted the challenge, and I started at the beginning of the year every year with the one toughest kid. And he was my project for the year. And then eventually by Christmas time, I'd pick another one because I could pretty well in 3 months, get them where I wanted. Some of these kids today went on success.
What was the key? What was the most important thing that you taught those kids that were so at risk?
LOVE. I gave them love. I was the first teacher that said, actually, I still remember, Mike, I used to call them in after school and just one-on-one. And I said, Okay, we're going to lay the cards on the table. I'm your teacher. You're my student. You're here to learn. I'm here to teach you. Whatever you've done at so-and-so school, out the window. You are starting the fresh as every other student. So the bright student and you are unequal with me. Now, the only thing that's going to be the difference is, are you going to go back to your old ways? Or are you going to continue on being equal to these good students? And nobody's ever talked to them like a human being. Everybody was all over the rear end. And it was really, really, I think I just showed them love. Mm-hmm. Just like, I'm there to help you. I have a job. You have a job. Mm-hmm. Let's do it together.
That's awesome.
But we all start with a fresh.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Good job. Okay. So you teach for 9 more years, right?
Yeah.
Then where do you go?
Go to Toronto. So what happened was I took a lot of courses like I do now. I took a lot of courses. I ended up having a supervisors of phys ed degree in quotation marks. So that put me at the top of the list for phys ed. Back then, in the mid 70s, I worked for, it was Elgin County, which isn't it now, they've changed the name, but Elgin County. So it was a small community. I knew every phys ed teacher. I knew all the heads. I knew all the principals. And one day somebody said to me, there's an opening for the head of phys ed 10 miles away in St. Thomas. Apply for it. Mm-hmm. I applied for it. Figured, hey, I got it. I got declined. They wouldn't take me. Wow. You know why?
No.
I phoned up and said to the guy, how come you wouldn't take me? You and I, we worked, we could work magic at the school. And the principal said, your principal vetoed it. Can you imagine?
So let me tell your principal wouldn't let you go.
That's right. Yeah. So I walked into his office. I won't say his name, Mr. Carson. And I said, Ken, could you please tell me if this is true or not? Is it true that you vetoed my move to St. Thomas when I named the school? He said, yep, no hesitation. I said, why? He said, you're my best teacher. I got 5 more years to go before retirement. Do you think I'm going to give up my best teacher? No way. So I said to him, Ken, how can I get out of this school now? There's 2 ways of doing it. You can resign or you can die. Seriously, verbatim. So I said, I won't give you the satisfaction of the second, but I will do the first. I went home to my wife. I said, you've always wanted, she was from Toronto, born and raised. You've always wanted to move back to Toronto. Go to Toronto. She's a social worker in St. Thomas. Get a job and I'll quit. Well, guess what? 2 weeks later, phone call, quit. I got a job. Wow. And I walked into, and this was the end of the year in June. And I walked in, put on his desk and said, I'm gone, goodbye, out of here. And I took off and we moved to Toronto. I had no job, no money, no nothing. And we were living with her parents for a while.
But you made it work.
Oh, yeah, well, it's a challenge, right? There's no way.
Well, this is a theme. This is a running theme in your life.
Oh, yeah. Right. And the other thing is, if anybody knows me for anything, I'm a competitor. I want to win on everything. There's no such thing as losing. Last week, we did our office did a bowling get together just to have fun. And I was pissed I came fourth. Yeah. I was mad. I mean, I wasn't that far off first, but I really wanted to win. Yeah. I'm a very.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.